Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Diversity MBA's Smart Leadership Webinar Series. I'm Larissa Williams, Vice President for the Center of Excellence for Diversity MBA. We are so very excited that you've joined us today, and if this is your first time, welcome. You are in for a special treat today. We are indeed so happy that you've taken the time out of your day to join our monthly webinar series for supporting your professional growth and development. Today, we will hear from an esteemed panel of four executive leaders from all different industries that will talk about their professional experiences and leadership as chief diversity officers. But before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping announcements. We are recording today's session, and the recording will be shared with our member company partners immediately following the session. Today's session will be highly interactive and engaging with the opportunity for you to ask questions. Should you have any questions for our speakers, please kindly enter your question in the questions section and it will be addressed accordingly, probably at the end of the discussion. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Peggy Harris, Regional Chief Diversity Officer with Atrium Health. In her role, she is responsible for advancing and supporting the organization's diversity and inclusion strategy. Previously, she served in various leadership positions within the company, including nurse director, vice president, and assistant vice president. She received a BSN from Florida State University, a master's degree from UNC Chapel Hill in healthcare administration, and a certificate in diversity management from the Institute for Diversity and Health Equity in Simmons College, from Simmons College in Boston, Massachusetts. She is a fellow in the American College of Healthcare Executives, and she serves on the board of directors of the Institute for Diversity in Health Management. She's the chair of the American Leadership Council for Diversity in Healthcare, and she currently serves as the advisory board director for Diversity MBA. So, Peggy, it is indeed my pleasure to introduce you as you moderate today's panel. Peggy will introduce the panelists and our discussion for today. So, Peggy, go ahead.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Larissa, and good afternoon, everyone. I would also like to join Larissa and thank everyone for joining this session on the state of Chief Diversity Officers. As the facilitator of today's conversation, I'm honored to have been asked by Diversity MBA to moderate with this outstanding panel of diversity officers. We have a group of panelists today who have a seat at the C-suite table and who are experienced at putting in the work. So again, I'd like to be able to facilitate them sharing their wisdom with this audience. Our panelists for this session are Diana Starks, Senior Vice President, Senior Diversity Advisor, and OMWI Director, Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. Sheryl Battles, Vice President, Global Diversity, Inclusion, and Engagement, Pitney Bowes, and Tyronne Stoudemire, Chief Diversity Officer, Hyatt Hotels. I will ask that they share a little bit more about themselves as they answer the first question, which by design is a softball. So, panelists, to help the audience get to know you better, I will ask each of you to tell us about your journey as an executive. How did you get to your current place? And let's just start with Sheryl.
Thank you so much, Peggy. You know, you would think after 3 years of in a COVID environment, I would know how to unmute myself, but I'm learning. It is really my pleasure to be here with you and with Diana and Tyronne to talk about this important topic. My journey from a career perspective has been primarily in the communication space, actually. And I've done a variety of things in corporate communications, from speechwriter for 3 CEOs to investor/financial communications, media relations, etc. But I always, as part of my portfolio, because of my work with the top executives, had to communicate about diversity and inclusion. So I've been at communications about diversity for about 25 years. About 8 years ago, I was asked to take on the strategy for diversity and inclusion as our head of diversity was retiring, and added to my portfolio. And about 3 years after that, it was, no, we understand it needs full-time focus. And so I was asked to take on not just strategy, but operations, thought leadership, and communications for diversity, inclusion, and employee engagement on a global basis.
Great. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you, Peggy. Well, I'll say my career in banking began in operations, administration, various levels of management, and then into executive leadership. And I think it's because of my work ethic. Well, I know it's because of my work ethic, my character, my integrity, and the mission of the institution that motivated me to know, grow, and lead through various phases of our work, that our leadership, our senior executive team, as well as the chief executive officer and president at that time, asked me to lead the work for the bank around diversity and inclusion. That's what it was called then. It has since, as we all know, moved to include equity and opportunity and belonging and a number of other characteristics. But for our bank, we are focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and opportunity. The work of becoming a senior executive was a smaller journey for me because of my past experience with the bank and the involvement that I've had with organization-wide initiatives. So when we started our D&I commitment at that time, the journey, it was probably late 2005, and as the organization saw the results of the work that I led, as far as pulling in others to join us in that journey and communicating about it, sharing the experience with our board of directors, that I was asked to join the executive leadership team. And that was a wow for me because it was, I mean, a big wow. Wow. Because it was an opportunity to engage our leaders on a different level, to truly enhance their commitment to diversity and inclusion and get them engaged in communicating about the work, speaking about the work and the reasons why, and bringing to the executive leadership team some richness as well as some opportunity for learning. So that's what brought me to the C-suite, and I've enjoyed the journey thus far.
Great. Thank you. And then Tyronne.
Thank you, Peggy. And very similar to both Sheryl and Diana, I began my career at a little small consulting firm called Hewitt Associates, based in Lincolnshire, Illinois, which is about 63 miles outside of Chicago. It was a very white, homogeneous organization known for executive compensation, moved into the outsourcing business. I started my career in outsourcing, working and managing call centers for major corporations such as Kmart, Walmart, the list goes on. And I was taught as a child early on, never find yourself in a non-revenue generating role, because when you do and companies go bad, you're the first to go. So it's kind of the last in, first to go. I was always working in operations where I could show how I was able to develop money and grow the business. And about 8 years into that, Andres Tapias was our director of diversity, needed someone to come in to operationalize the diversity strategy he had created on three-pronged strategies of, hiring to levels, attract a certain type of investor, and turn into really kind of consulting on the work, as we were a consulting firm. And we had what I call underground affinity groups. And our Black affinity group was run by a woman named Juanita Robinson Brown. And it was just a gathering of Black people because it was so few. And we was a time we grew from 5,000 to 25,000 within a 3-year time period, so enormous amount of growth. But as they hired Blacks, we were all spread out across the campus. We were never all together. So she would bring us together. We would network and have conversations. And over time, the work evolved, and we needed to have more first coming into the organization. And we put our Black History program, and it was really kind of your traditional kind of ethnic food, little ethnic garb, and it was really kind of crazy. And I was one of the highest ranking Blacks in the company at the time. And they asked me to talk to the group of employees. And I said, well, I had ignored it because also my family taught me around the dinner table was never associate more than one or two Blacks, is when you do, your white counterparts think you're trying to overthrow the government or incite a riot. So I had these things in my head that I was taught early to avoid. Come in, do your good job, keep your head down, and you'll be promoted up into the organization. So I was reluctant at first. Juanita kept pushing me to come, and so I finally came. She said, "Come get me at 5:30, and I'll come down." She came down, got on the elevator, went to the basement, down the corridor, around the corner. I said, "Where are we going?" Right? There was this little room with a few Black folks just coming together, and I was like, "Oh, wait a minute, we got to do better than this. There's much more we can do to celebrate our culture." We created a hue and choir, and we invited people to come to sing, and musicians and all these people. And when we put the posting out, the majority of the people were white because that's the population were white and there were Blacks. And the Black affinity group said, we cannot have a Black history program with an all white choir. And my response was, sure we can. Because if any individual is going to volunteer to work, to come to rehearsal after working 9-10 hours, learn how to sing Negro, Black national anthem, Negro hit spirituals and gospels, they're all right with me. We put this program on. We have this great choir to sing and musicians, and we turned our cafeteria into a theater with about 875 seats. We invited customers to come in, clients to come in, relatives, and we invited Kenwood Academy High School to be that band to come and play for us as well. Our CEO gets up and says, whoever put this program on needs to be a part of my executive committee. So I was like, wow, is that easy to get to the C-suite? I could have did this a long time ago, right? Because background is singing, so I knew I could do something really great with that. So we met, we had lunch. He said, we got this thing called diversity, and we have Andrea Tapia, but we need someone from operations to come and operationalize the work. And my first response was no, because one back to the message that I got was never find yourself a non-revenue generating role. And I was not an HR person, and I didn't really care for HR because it was about protecting the status quo. They didn't come around, it was wrong, so I didn't want to be a part of that brand and reputation as well. So I initially told him no. He says, wait a minute. And very seldom, and I don't encourage anybody else to do this, you very seldom tell anyone from the C-suite no. You do need to kind of figure out how you do it. But I actually said no and deliberately because I was going down a totally different route and I didn't want to be in HR. He says, you already reserve the right to come back to you. But we really think you should do this job. So he came back about 6 months later and we talked, and I did my homework. I reached out to other diversity practitioners such as Pat Harris at McDonald's, May Snow at Starbucks. These are legends and Sheryls in this space. Some told me to do it and some didn't. There was Melanie Hobson of Area Investments says, Tyronne, go for it. This is your opportunity to make a difference and to help build legacy in an all-white environment. And my pastor of the church, God rest his soul, Dr. Frazier, made the same statement. Son, this is your opportunity to really go forth and do something that no one has done before. You can do this. So when I met with him, he said, okay, listen, I'm not taking no for an answer. I want you to do this. If you don't like it, do it for 2 years. And if you don't like it, put you back into the business. Now, I'm now 9 years into the organization, fully vested, ready to go. I said, I'll do it under 3 conditions. He says, what? And he was getting irritated with me, by the way. And I said, one, we need to make sure that we have your sponsorship. Because if you're behind this work and you tell people to do it, they're going to probably follow what you say, unlike I did when you asked me. But the majority of people will follow you. And then 2, that if he felt that we would, I needed resources, I needed money, I needed a budget. He said, well, how much do you need? I just made the number up, to be honest. And Sheryl and Diane would agree this. I said $2.8 million. I just threw it out there. I was trying to reconcile an invoice to a client, and that number was in my head. And he says, you got it. And I says, well, last but not least, I says, I would like to turn this to a revenue generating function, because if we're having issues with diversity and inclusion, many of our clients have the same thing. We can build it internally and sell it externally, which is a plan that Andreas had mapped out, that we would do it. And we generated like $4 million in the first 8 months of work. So it was when I was really thrown into it, went kicking and screaming, but I've now done it for almost 30 years, which has proven to be really great for me. The other message that people saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. Our CEO was like, look, when he comes into a room, he's done enough work to be able to know who are the A players, who the B players, who the C players are. And he felt that I was a player, but I was not walking into, as we say in the church, into my full glory or my, I wasn't walking into my, my destiny type thing. Oftentimes you need a sponsor that will see something in you, see yourself, and push you forward. And that has been a part of my professional career entirely. So we did that, and about 18 years into the role, Aon acquired us. And I chose to do something different. Orlando Ashford, who was the president of Mercer's talent management team, asked me to come and work with him to develop the evidence-based diversity strategy, leading the analytics and the predictive analytics, and I took the job.
Great, great. Thank you so much for that, Tyronne. Not to cut you off, because I think you're getting maybe into some of the questions I'm going to ask you a little bit later on. So I don't want to get ahead of the game, but it's so interesting that each of your paths to the C-suite were different. And that just speaks to the diversity of chief diversity officers. And I always say that as an executive within our organization, that the path for CDO is inherently no different. You need the same skills and acumen that you would if you were the executive over finance, over quality, over productions, whatever that is. And so I think what this entire group has just shared with us is that your path you have followed that same path. So thank you for that. But now I want to jump into the deep end. So I got a question that may be just a little bit more, not necessarily challenging, but I'm curious to know. So according to a March 2023 article by Ivanta on CHRO's views on top priorities and opportunities, it says that in 2021, D&I was #1 on the list of the top 5 priorities for chief human resources officers, including learning organization development, workforce data and analytics, talent analytics, employee experience, and health and well-being solutions. In 2022, D&I dropped from #1 to #3 on the list of CHRO priorities. And this year, in 2023, as of March, last month, DEI is at the bottom of that list, #5 of that list of 5. So we know that in some of what you've shared already, effective leaders are often visionary. They need to be able to see around the corner, forecasting the future, and setting up their organizations for the what's next. So now, panelists, it's 5 years from now, and diversity practitioners are still playing a vital role in moving the needle with diversity, equity, inclusion, opportunities, so forth and so on. But being aware of the current drop, #1, #3, now #5 on the list of 5, being aware of the current drop from a top priority to the bottom priority, do you see more success or less success in the CDO role? Are we still in the C-suite 5 years from now? And what should we be doing more of to ensure that the longevity of this chief diversity officer function within our own organizations? And I know, Sheryl, your organization has a long history of D&I, so let's start with you again.
Sure. When to start with the going from it's #1 to now it's #5, and who knows what it'll be next year, right? One of the things, certainly when we think about the murder of George Floyd, was a catalyst for many organizations in 2020 to suddenly go, oh, wow, there's this thing called D&I. And what happened was that I think many jumped in to the moment without understanding that this is really a movement about ensuring opportunity for all. So as long as you have people in your organization, then diversity, inclusion, and equity ought to be #1, because this is all about people and the things that we are doing to make it a more inclusive environment, to make sure that everybody's respected, everybody's voice is heard, everybody gets the opportunity to develop their talents and skills and display those to the benefit of all. That makes the organization stronger, period. So I think some might be suffering from a little tunnel vision when they're thinking very narrowly about diversity, inclusion, and equity, merely being, oh, let me look around and make sure we have enough mixture in our organization, if you will. But it's really about ultimately how you manage that human capital to make sure you get the full benefit from the investment you've made in hiring the people and keeping them there. And so when you say mental well-being, you say employee experience, you list all these other things, all of those are integral to how we treat the individual and the culture we create that allows all individuals to really thrive. So I think we will 100% for those companies who understand what time it is. We will 100% still be in the C-suite and be an even more integral part of things.
Great, love that. Thank you, Sheryl. Tyronne?
Yeah, so I think that, following what Cheryl said, I build a little bit here. When you look at the importance of it, I think that your B2B, business to business, will tend to probably fall in that category. But those who are business to consumers will have to lead with diversity, equity, and inclusion because our demographics are shifting and changing dramatically. Our customers that were 50 years ago no longer is very different today. So when you look at hospitals or universities, hotels, we have to be relevant from a DEI perspective. It is still one of our top priorities. And it has been, even before the death of murder George Floyd, diversity was a part of highest DNA in 1967 during the height of civil rights, where we invited Dr. Martin Luther King into our hotel to have us combine lunch with blacks and white. And every hotel told him no. So it's been a part of who we are, if it makes sense. So I build on that. I also think that when you have leaders that have been at this for a very long time, such as myself, and my CEO has been with us double-digit years, you can continue to grow and move it down. Most CEOs' average lifespan is 4 years, so you're starting to stop and starting to stop. And I've had a ongoing journey with our CEO and other leaders who really believe this is a part of our purpose. Our purpose is to help people be their best. Diversity, equity, inclusion is the manifestation of purpose. It's how it comes alive.
Yeah.
But I also think that every decade there's been a disruption that people will identify that has moved us from the civil rights movement to Rosa Parks sitting on the bus to now the death and murder of George Floyd. There's been progress that has been made. And so when you look at that progress of how we maximize, most corporations reacted to the death and murder of George Floyd. Other organizations responded to it. And we responded with change starts here, looking inward first before going external to help physicians heal our own selves. Who we employ, develop, and advance, who we support, and who we buy from was our goals before the pandemic, and we've trending in the right direction. So again, I suspect about that data point because it is still top priority, particularly I would say for standing and say in favor of B2B. B2C, business to consumers. We have to lead with DNI.
Great, love that. Thank you. And then Diana.
Well, thank you so much for the question, Peggy, because I think that if DE&I is a business imperative for an organization, then it doesn't matter what occurs. True enough that it has some social economic effect on a body of people, but it's the fact that you have to stay true to your knitting. You cannot be reactive. You have to be proactive. And you mentioned being able to see what's next or what's around the corner is an important aspect of leadership. And the DE&I executive can help an organization with that. If they're part of that executive suite as part of the leadership team, then they're going to bring some level of intelligence to what is happening and oftentimes what's happening before it happens, because they'll be able to read the signs of the environment. They'll be able to see across different demographics. They'll be able to share perspectives based upon their individual learning, their experiences, and what's important to the organization. So for me, I think that 5 years from now, diversity practitioners will still have a vital role in helping with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they'll have a vital role in being a member of that executive leadership team.
Right.
If I can still Peggy build off of what Diane said, just an example, is that I was able to foresee during the prior administration a new revenue stream for us, which is protesters, and how those protesters was going to show they had to stay somewhere, right? And there were different protesters for different things. That was a revenue stream that I was able to forecast to prepare the organization to be able to receive that approach, and it was a very lucrative revenue stream for us when we weren't really selling anything else because of the pandemic. So how we showed up, we would forecast and prepare for that. We also implemented during that time frame that we would not allow hate groups to convene at our hotels. We couldn't stop them from staying from a discrimination perspective, but to convene and have a white supremacist groups and black serving white people, and they hated them, would put us at risk, right, for our colleagues. So again, you have to be able to look ahead at what's around the corner. Those are the ones that will sustain and grow the business.
Great. I love all of those responses, and I think we are 4 different industries represented on this group today. And also it's apparent from your responses that we have very engaged, proactive leadership who help us. Sometimes that make the job easy. I've been doing this work for more than 20 years, and having leaders who understand the strategy about the strategicness of the work and the necessity of the work has made my life easier over the years. And so I think I can probably say the same from your organizations based on your responses. But I also just would like to make sure in the back of your mind, I'm always thinking about what about the least among us. So I imagine there may be people on this in the audience who may be, one of those leaders who really do not have the resources, the leadership support, et cetera, et cetera. So as we also respond, please also think in mind of, what are those nuggets, that takeaways that some of our audience members may take back to say, this is how we engage some of that. Because it's obvious from your experience that your leadership gets it, and you're in a position of power to help make it happen. But we also know that a great percentage of the people who are assigned this work as another duty as assigned really are grassroots and are not in the same seats of power and that we may be sitting in. So I just call that to your attention. But I'm also interested personally in understanding the state of the CDOs of color, African Americans in particular. And a few diversity officer points that I would like for this group to consider as you frame your responses include some data that I received from Pamela. So according to our own Diversity MBA benchmarking inclusive leadership index, 70% of DEI budgets are less than 5% of the HR budgets. 89% of CDOs report to the CHRO, the Chief Human Resource Function. Only 2% of CDOs report to the CEO, to CEOs. And only 9% of CDOs report to other C-suite leaders. And of note is that 62% of new companies that hire CDOs, they hire with no staff for the first 2 years. And then the average size of a staff in the CDO functions, Chief Diversity Officer functions, about 3 people. Zipper.com shares that CDOs across all industries, and that would include ours, education, government, corporate America, et cetera, 45% are male and 55% are female. And Zipper also reports that from an ethnicity perspective, that 76.1% of diversity officers are white, 7.8% are Hispanic or Latina, 7.7% are Asian, and only 3.8% are Black or African American, self-identifying. And then only 0.7% of Native American or Alaskan Hawaiian. So my question, 2 questions, I guess, and as you frame it, and let's be brief because we want to get to a lot of other questions, but how does this data land on you, first of all? And then secondly, most Standard & Poor's 500 companies have a Chief Diversity Officer role, and we saw a slight uptick in CDO appointments following the George Floyd murder, of course. However, the average tenure for CDOs is decreasing. It decreased from 3.1 years in 2018 to 1.8 years in 2021, according to the data that I have. And if we are just now getting real acknowledgement this work is business, community, and marketplace imperative or priority, and not simple program, another duty as assigned, why are we still leaving? So how do you look at the data, especially with only 7.8% of Chief Diversity Officers being Black African American? That's not the story that I hear generally speaking when it comes to diversity work within organizations. But what do you think also about this idea that we CDOs are leaving? We're not staying very long in these positions. Let's see, Tyronne, you look like you're just ready to answer this question. So
let me just say that I always admire Pam and the research she does. She asks tough questions and she gets good stats, and I think that's great. But for me at my house at Hyatt, we just have a history of longevity in general. We have leaders that have been with us for 40 years and 30 years, and I've just reached my 10th year. And every company that I've only worked for 3 companies. And each of those I've been called into the organization from consulting into delivering. My budget is adequate for what I do. My team is adequate. We have the embedded engage process. So I don't have a huge team, but I have people that have dotted lines into me from talent acquisition, the talent development. I spend more time with our CEO than anyone else in HR. I also, with my team, report to the executive committee more than anyone else in the organization. Each of our executives are executive sponsors of our DBRTs, opposite of the groups, to build cross-cultural competence. So we have two heterosexual white men who are executives who lead our Hyatt Black DBRG. We have two heterosexual white women leading our Pride DBRG, sponsors and co-sponsors. So they're advocating and supporting the work of those DBRGs, right? Our chief commercial officer and I meet and talk about where do we need to show up in the Black, Latino, and Asian community? What partnerships we need to have, and how are we going to measure our success, and how are we going to help them to grow? So my conversation is a little different than what others may be having. I have seen an uptake of new chief commercial officers. I'm mentoring probably 30 of them, and half of them are Black, and a third is Latino and Asian, right? So I see a little bit differently, but the retention is high, is very high. People are leaving faster than we have before. They're not staying longer. I have been privileged now to do that because of the company that I'm working for and our commitment. I think that reporting structure for me, I actually sometimes have to slow my CEO down. He gets ahead of me, right? I say, okay, Mark, that's really great, but we need to do these three things first, right? So I don't have that lack of access to our senior leaders. They bring things to my attention. For example, one of our senior leaders brought to my attention that we have 8 diversity business research groups, and our 8th one is men on Mid-Eastern North African DBRG. That population of people after the murder of George Floyd no longer would be classified as other or white because that was not a part of the demographics that we from a perspective. They started that and developed. I gave them the guidelines, but they started, developed it, funded, and doing things for the entire enterprise. So we have this kind of test and learn model as an agile organization that they're taking this among themselves. I become the expert and the strategist and how to communicate, but then you have to embed it across the whole organization. And most people are really confined to HR. They don't expand beyond. I think Sheryl, from a communications perspective, writing for CEOs and those types of things, Diana, all the things we've done in our organization has prepared us to be successful where we are today. And I'll tip over to my colleagues on the panel to support that.
Great. Thank you for that. I'm sorry. Someone's not muted, but I would offer also, I love what you're sharing, but for me, I heard that as the reason why you're staying in longevity, that your organization is so strong. My question though is, if only 3.8% of CDOs are Black, African American, the majority are white, 76% are white, then why are people leaving? We know, you've shared with me why it's an imperative, why it's so important. We understand strategically. So I would ask you, Sheryl, in your opinion, you can also tell me why you're staying, because I've heard a little bit about your company, but with that being said, and your network, because again, I want those nuggets to go to those people who may be not in the same driver's seat that we are, because I think for me, it's a travesty that, the messaging for me, typically when I'm out in community, people assume that in the diversity space, we're all Black, and that it may be a gimme, on and on and on, that we maybe don't have the same leadership skills and acumen that any other leader have, that we're not C-suite leaders, we're not C-suite ready, and all that come into play, I think, in my opinion, in my network when it comes to diversity. So I'm truly surprised. I didn't realize that only 3.8% of CEOs were Black, African American. I even made the assumption that the number was higher. I didn't think it was 76%, but I thought it was higher. So my curiosity then, even within Pitney Bowes, where we know that you have a long track record, what are you seeing? Are you seeing people leave the profession, the D&I profession? Are they feeling supported? Are they not feeling supported? What's going on with that?
I think, I think you pose a really interesting question, Peggy, and it's a very complex one, and in many ways, much like D&I itself, in terms of the work. This is hard work, right? Mm-hmm. This is not easy work when you talk about, as Tyronne talked about, when you're operationalizing it, when you're looking around those corners and have the vision from the strategy perspective, you operationalize it. And what you're actually involved in is change management. So you're changing policies and practices. You are, in some instances, changing or trying to mold leadership attitudes and behaviors, and with that, agendas and the resources that flow from those agendas. You're trying to impact organizational culture, and then you're getting all the way down to individual behaviors and attitudes. That's a lot. That's a lot. So it is complex work. There is a lot of it. And if in some of those organizations who are earlier in their journey, they may not have even a clear idea of what D&I is, what its benefits are, how to tie it to their business agenda, and what success looks like. And so if you're walking into one of those organizations, and if on top of it, perhaps you are less seasoned in the work, then it's very tough to be successful, and it can be very, very frustrating, especially combined with the resource starvation and the misunderstanding about what you're doing, how strategic it is, how it ties to the business agenda, et cetera. So I think it's a very, very complex mix of things that you're dealing with. And also in Tyronne's story, he hit on it as well. There's a perception often about the value of this work. And that somehow what you're doing is all fluff and it's not that important. And so I think we have some folks who self-select out of it. I certainly did not raise my hand for this role. I always talk about, I'm a granddaughter of a Baptist preacher, so it's like I was called to this because I did not go after it. Would have never raised my hand for this role. And I wonder about people who do actually. Yeah. But it definitely, I think there's some self-selection there. And then add that final thought with the emotional tax. Yeah. We bear the tax. Some call it the diversity tax. Others say it's the emotional tax. But we bear this added tax of being this advocate, of being this professional, while at the same time being subject to the conditions we're trying to change. And that's a lot.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you, Tyronne. Thank you, Sheryl. I think both perspectives are so spot on, and I think very instructive to those people, for those organizations or for those leaders who truly are trying to understand how to move the needle in the space. But similar, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question. So to be clear, D&I work is hard work. It's not easy, as both Tyronne and Sheryl have said. Not getting any easier.
Before you move on, the question I want to say is that it's also imperative that we understand how the organization makes money. Right, that's a critical thing. And for me to be able to understand that Black spent $109 trillion in travel, and we did not get our market share of that, was compelling for us to look at how we treat Blacks. So having that data analytics and understanding where the workforce, the workplace, and the marketplace, and understanding the connections there, and understand this, that 70% of learning development departments are all white people. So now you have Caucasians trying to create training and culture and change the culture and change management, who they don't understand enough about Black culture and Latino culture, Asian culture. That's an area that we have to penetrate as well, because at the end of the day, it's about culture. And we're similar, we are different, but our different lives and our cultural background, messages that were ingrained to us from our grandparents and our parents, and how we make decisions and how we resolve conflicts. That's the real work. It's not Taco Tuesday and Fried Rice Friday. It's not events and celebrations that we all do, but the reality is that this is heavy lifting, and this is a real change management initiative that most organizations don't understand. That what Sheryl said, they don't even know what the business case is in some cases. So I don't want to disrupt, but I think that's an important piece to know. If you don't understand how your company makes money, and mine is getting heads in Vegas, period.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm glad you interrupted, because that also brought another thought to mind. I think one of my years, and so many years ago, one of my first mentoring lessons from my sponsor at the time, when I moved from being a staff, I'm a nurse by background, staff nurse, into executive leadership, was that you got to know the business. So it's nice to have ideas, but you got to know the business. You got to know the connection points. You got to know what the buying power of certain groups are. You got to know what the needs are, et cetera, whatever that is. So I think, to your point, Tyronne, knowing the business is what helped us. So I would share that with any novice leader in the D&I space. It's great to talk about equity and how we can engage and promote, but you also got to know the business, because what sits in healthcare sits differently in hotel management, sits differently in an organization like Pitney Bowes, sits differently or lands differently in banking. But when you know the business, if you truly know your game, you can make the connections. And I think from a C-suite level, you have to be able to make the connections to the business. So I love that. I love that. But I was going to say to you, Diana, that we know that the work of DI is hard. It's not easy. We've all said that. But what are some of the pain points and barriers that your organization, or maybe your industry, if you have no pain points, at the Cleveland Bank, but what are some of the pain points that you have had to deal with that may be instructive to our audience about how they can navigate some of those hurdles?
Yeah, Cheryl, Peggy, I'm sorry. I was thinking about what Cheryl said, and it resonated with me. With respect to pain points in my organization, I mean, I look at it like this: to whom much is given, much is required. Simple as that. When I accepted this role, I knew there was going to be pain. I knew that there were going to be some uphill battles. But you have to stay, again, true to your knitting. What is the reason for you doing this work on behalf of the organization? It's about the mission of the organization and not about self. So I can take the pain. I'm like, I've got that I call it the anointing oil of the mallard duck. When it rains, they don't go run and hide. They stay they stay the course and they let that rain roll off their back, right? Don't take it personal because it's not about you. It's about the fact that you're dealing with people who don't understand, and you have to use those as teachable moments in this field. Don't take it personal. Now, if somebody is, just being very abrasive to you, there's a process for that, right? I'm not telling anybody that they need to be a martyr. So this goes across levels of individuals and organizations and leadership, as well as, I call it the base of the organization, which is the employees. So use it as a teachable moment. I have, as an example, there was a time where we were trying to have more inclusive healthcare benefits, predominantly for domestic partners and for the LGBTQ community. And I had the COO, the Chief Operating Officer, um, ask me the question. He said, I'm wrestling with this. Should we move into providing inclusive benefits or not? And I don't, it was a private conversation, so I won't reveal all of what was said, but I listened. And because he trusted me to bring the question to me, I just listened. I asked clarifying questions, and then I said, well, isn't everybody entitled to health care? That was my answer. And that's what got the approval for us to move forward with inclusive benefits. And we were not the last Reserve Bank to do that, nor were we the first, but we were right in the middle. And I was more concerned about, isn't everybody entitled to health care? Quality health care, if you want to add that adjective to it. But isn't everybody entitled? And so that was a teachable moment. And I remember him sharing with me after we implemented that, thank you so much. Now he's no longer with the bank, so I feel comfortable in sharing that. But you look for those teachable moments. Don't take it personal, and help move the needle for each individual, whether it's one at a time or a group at a time or an organization at a time. As it was said, this is a change management initiative. All this work has to be tied to the organization's strategy. It has to be tied to the mission. And if people within the organization are not committed to it, then perhaps it's not the organization for them to work in.
Peggy, let me just clarify. I know we're recording this. I want to get the right fact. Blacks and African Americans spent $109 billion in travel. So I said trillion, it was a B. It was a billion. Make sure that goes on the records.
Okay. Sorry. Got it. Thank you.
I just wanted to jump in on that last question from, I think, all organizations, all industry perspective in terms of a pain point represented by kind of the environment and what's happening in general. But before I do that, I'm going to say, Diana, I'm going to use that anointed oil of the mallard duck. I wrote that down. So thank you very much. That was awesome. But there's a tension between equity and the meritocracy narrative, right? And in the great meritocracy narrative, particularly in this country, it's about pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Whereas equity acknowledges you may not have boots, and if you do have boots, they may not have straps, right? So you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and so companies starting to wrestle with the concept that true equity, because a lot of people talk about equity, but not a lot understand what it really means. True equity has to start with the acknowledgement that we are starting in different places.
Yes.
Number two, then that means to meet everybody where they are, we may have to offer different kinds of supports and opportunities and ways of growth and advancement. And then that gets us to number three, the great fallacy that has haunted diversity from the beginning about the deservedness of those for whom we are trying to provide equity, as if they are not talented. It's not about they are not talented. They just haven't had the same opportunities necessarily to develop or display that talent. So as we're seeing in this environment, the more the push comes on the equity piece, the more you are starting to see the backlash and the opposition to what's going on, saying, well, that's not fair. And that's why you have to keep, as both Tyronne and Diana have talked about, it's got to be tied to your business strategy. If we are making the weakest or those who've had the least opportunity stronger on the team, the whole team gets stronger. We're all able to do more. We all win by doing this work. And if that narrative is missing, the backlash and the hesitancy to continue to push and move forward is going to get greater, I think.
Great.
Now, to build again on what Sheryl and Diana said, is that the data matters. In the financial world, nothing speaks louder than zero, and math has no opinion. So when you look at representation and see that you have less women in C-level roles and people of color, African Americans, which we look at that demographic to be determined where it is. One of our goal is to double the representation of women around the globe, and people of color in the United States with the focus on blacks. Because our least common denominator in leadership roles were blacks. No one could dispute that. No one could dispute that. And the goal is to reach parity. So who's going to dispute parity, right? We say that we're fair, equitable organization, right? Here's the evidence of. You got that savvy enough and brave enough to say that in front of leaders. We've had 3 defining moments, and now 4 at Hyatt, when we rolled out purpose and care and said that we were an organization that care for people be their best. Our CEO said, if you subscribe to that behavior, I invite you to leave. The next one, when we decided we were going to let groups convene in our hotels, he made that statement and asked people, if you can't subscribe to that, I invite you to leave. He says, Black lives matters to me, it matters to this organization. If it doesn't matter to you, you can leave. When leaders take that type of stand, go back to Sheryl said about the equity piece, right? And then when you have people say, well, just play by the golden rule, but the golden rule is made by those who have the goal. What about those who don't have the goal? Right? The bootstraps, they don't have the strap, Sheryl, but it's Mexicans can wear moccasins. So, and some people ain't got no shoes, let alone boots, right? So we really stand in that, if we as leaders stand in the gap for those who don't have, we're not gonna. Diana said, much is required. This is a calling. This is not just a title. This is not a role. I can't even, this is not how much money I make. I don't even know. It's not about the money for me. It's a calling. Now, I want to continue to pay my bills and do well, but the reality is that I'm not in it for the title or for the money. I don't care what you call me. I don't care who I report to, but the work that I've been called to do is about looking at moving from equality to equity. Moving from the same to meet the people where they are, give the tools to be successful, and there's money to be made and there's hands in the hands. Another stat is that 86% of Blacks prefer all inclusives. We purchased Apple Leisure Group in 2019. The market share of our money that takes us through the pandemic was leisure travel. When you can start finding those examples, those data points, people pay attention. Because
I love what you're saying, Tyronne, and I love what you said, Sheryl. And I think both of you sort of answered my next question. But I know time is almost running out, but I do want to get to this because for me, being in healthcare, data is king. I love data. And so, and I think you've both spoken to that. So I may be asking Diana this question first. So utilizing data and holding leaders accountable. So it's nice for my CEO, who's a wonderful, forward-thinking leader with an equity lens. He can say it, but there are 150,000 teammates. And so, and then there are 2,000 leaders, and they may or may not, because sometimes the talking points come from the top, and sometimes it doesn't get translated down, especially middle management, but sometimes it doesn't get translated down to the next 2 levels of leadership. But with that, utilizing data and holding leaders accountable, especially is important to make real impact. And leaders often, my experience has been, I always speak personally, has often been that sometimes we as leaders think more highly of our work than our data validates. How you doing, Peggy? I'm doing great. How'd you do it? I closed the gap. But when you look at the data, maybe not so much so. So what are some of the best practices, and I'll start with you, Diana, that your organization uses in leveraging data to really hold leaders accountable? So it's not just one man and one woman at the top or the CDO talking about it and giving all the data points and giving all that, but how do you really hold leaders accountable so executives at all levels of operation buy into this? And again, to your point, I think Tyronne made the point that, or maybe it was Sheryl that said that, if you can't buy into this, maybe this is not the organization for you, something like that. Okay. How do you get to that point from an accountability perspective?
Yeah, so I love that. The data, and being a bank, we love data. We just, we've got an economic team, they love data, and they, use that data to form opinions as part of their research. So here's the thing about data. Data should provide information, and information should drive discussion. When we started, and discussion, of course, should drive results. When we started our journey, I said, I need access to all data. I received that. Some people tried to hold back. I said, I need access to all data. And in a D&I profession, just like any other business area, the data is what the data is. If you don't like the data, then you take action to change the data. Don't just bellyache about the data. The data is what the data is. And the data helps to inform how your organization, your organization is and where it needs to go. And you have to be very deliberate and intentional about that. So 4 years ago, we implemented a team objective for our executive leadership members around workforce recruitment, workforce retention, workforce development, advancement. We recently add supplier diversity to that. And every quarter, we look at that data to see what it tells us. And then we look at future opportunities to see what actions we need to take. There's an accountability. The executive leadership team. That's myself, the senior vice presidents, executive vice presidents, and our COO. The only person that doesn't participate in that is our president and CEO. So if we make it, we all achieve the objective. If we don't make it, we don't achieve the objective, and the compensation is tied to those objectives. That's important. It's not just about gathering and saying, okay, woo-hoo, we made it, or, oh, we didn't make it. But compensation is tied to that objective. So it's intentional, it's strategic, and it's deliberate. And if somebody's not pulling their weight in that process, then side eye. What's going on?
What's going on?
What is going on? So we want to do, and this is where organizations, they'll say, we have a report card, we have data. Well, our data is also on our public website. We have metrics around diversity, equity, and inclusion that we've identified, and we publish this in our annual report to Congress, as well as put it on our public website. And when you do that, whether you're in a for-profit organization or nonprofit organization, it's going to get the attention of people. What is important to you, you'll be transparent about.
I love that. I want to hear from it, but I also know we only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to call on Larissa and ask if there's a burning question in the chat or the questionnaire that we want to pose for our panelists before we, I do have a final question if that's okay. Larissa?
No questions in the chat.
Okay.
I have a question. This is Pam.
Okay.
This has been awesome. So, okay, so you guys, we all have to carry. Yes, we're getting the business priorities. And I'm getting this a lot. I coach 40 senior executives. It's the trauma. While you have your passion, I'm giving that to you. But it's the trauma of the social injustices that spill over into the workplace, that you have an expectation to be able to manage the workforce and how they're feeling to be able to be productive at the end of the day. And so as Chief Diversity Officer, particularly African American Black Chief Diversity Officer, what can you share that you do to balance it while continuing to provide the direction, the unrealistic direction and solutions that's expected of you with the continuing drama of the world that we live in, trauma of the world that we live in. What are some, I guess, nuggets, Peggy, that folks can maybe briefly share how they're able to sustain this?
And I'll just add to your question and say thank you, because that truly was my last question around self-care. So I'll ask the panelists to respond. What do you do for self-care? How do you take care of yourself? Because this work is not easy, and we know that, as Pamela said, you're dealing with the same issues that everybody else is, but yet you're expected to manage it and to move the needle forward from an inclusiveness perspective.
So I'll start and say that as somebody's going by doing some landscaping, I like to get outside. I enjoy all 4 seasons in Northeast Ohio. So if I need to take a walk, I'll do it. If I need to take an hour, I'll do it, because I know at the end of the day, I'm going to give the organization 100% of my good self.
Yeah, love it. Sheryl?
I would say faith, family and friends, and fun. And for fun, I like to read, and I love HGTV. Just give me a good home decorating show, and I am good, as well as the cooking competition. So that's my channel.
I would subscribe to both what Sheryl and Diana said, but I would add to it is I work for a hospitality company. Travel is also a way I'm able to add a day to my trip or go a date earlier and just move into a hotel, just be myself, disconnect from everything and everybody, and just regenerate. The other thing to see is that these types of conversations and programs that are put on, that we listen to what other people are dealing with, learning from others, hearing what other people are trying to know that I'm not crazy, I'm not here by myself. Do a lot of reading, and so Pam's research and her data that she collects helps us say I'm aligned or I'm not aligned. So taking that downtime is important, right? And giving time to yourself. Personal development is that personal development. That's a part of my personal development, is to look at Tyronne and spend some time with me and rethink it through, and then connect with others to make sure that I'm sharing best practices. And I was taught to lift as I climb. And so spending time to mentor others and having time to talk and share is a part of that well-being for me and how I regenerate myself with new ideas and new thoughts.
Great. And I love all of those. And for me personally, I enjoy the outdoors as well. You can see I'm sitting by a window where you may not be able to see a window now. And I love what God is doing with nature. So I love that. So I do enjoy taking walks. I enjoy travel. But I think my greatest love is my family. And I have 4 wonderful, beautiful daughters who do not live at home. So whenever I can get to be with them, either in their home place or my home place, that just brings me joy and helps me to rejuvenate and create that Peggy that can then bring all of her stuff to work. But it's so important. Being in healthcare, I totally subscribe to that question, Pamela, and realize that, resilience is important, but in our work, sometimes we keep getting knocked down, but have to keep getting up, and that takes self-care, and that is so very important. And I think we're right at time, so the time has flown by. I want to thank all of you for your comments. I think lots and lots of wisdom. Would love to stay connected in this work. And now I'll turn it back over to Larissa or Pamela.
Yes, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation. We do have a question in the chat. And so may I ask Diana to answer this question? Can you say more about compensation tied to DEI workforce performance metrics? How did you get executive buy-in?
Okay, that's a great question, and thanks for it. Thanks for the question. We show that if what gets measured gets done, and what gets done it gets compensated. We use that simple approach to it, and then got the buy-in of the president of the organization, and she said yes. That was it.
I can add to that just briefly too. Is the reality of it is that we had tried everything and wasn't moving the needle fast enough. And then we decided that we did tie to compensation. That's when it actually really happened. People had a stake in the game and they were held accountable. And our environment we also did was we posted every job, right? We didn't post a general manager role because that was care for and succession planning. So you had to look at your systems and control for the bias. When we rolled it out with us, when I met with the board says it's great, but make sure they have the resources to be able to make those goals. Some of the set unrealistic goals, people can't make it. So I spent 2 years of building confidence in doing this work and providing a path forward. It got so aggressive until the CEO says, I think we should double these numbers. I said, no, because we've not done it yet. Let's wait. So your counsel, as you work with them, you want to be able to see what's the path forward and how you're going to get there, what's available in your labor market, what's available internal and external, and what systems are in place to make sure that you're going to achieve those goals. It's nothing worse than they're setting goals and they can't make it. You got to see the path forward for them. And then we had a point that we were shy of one last year. And they didn't make their goals, so they didn't get paid. They were upset. I said, but you had 27 opportunities. Out of the 27 opportunities, you should have promoted or hired someone in one of our goals, right? So, and none of our CEO and the board did back down. It was just fine. I was going to give in. Oh, give it to them. No, they did not back down. And that's what makes a difference. So people are afraid. And when they decide their money, they're going to get it done. They're going to figure it out. They're going to find them.
I would simply add very quickly, we have a culture metric tied to compensation. And one of the pieces of the culture metric is D&I. And D&I is actually the gate. So if you don't hit the D&I numbers, then none of the rest of the culture metric counts. And that is directly tied to executive compensation for all of our top executives.
And Livers, I would say briefly that for us, leadership counts. And so certainly we have that buy-in at the CEO level, but the board as well. We have a board committee on compensation. And so once those goals get threaded in, then you can tie it. But we advocate, my team advocated for it for years and years and years. But once we got that senior leadership buy-in and board leadership, it happened. So just throw that out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We really appreciate the opportunity today to hear from your brilliance and your wisdom. Thank you, everybody, for joining Diversity MBA's Smart Series webinars. We do have our webinars every month, so we look forward to seeing you again next month. So have a great day. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.